Hello, hello. Let me fix this. Ooh. Oh, God. I'm a professional. Okay. All right, here we go. This is called The First Night. A few years ago, I rented an apartment in a complex that used to be the nunnery for St. Anne's Catholic School in Houston. At the time, they were overhauling the entire building, and the upstairs apartment I had chosen was freshly updated, yet still maintained its classic 1940s bones, tile and hardwood floors. In other words, it was irresistible to me. I figured the rest of the renovations would be completed quickly, and I would live peacefully and quietly in my little top floor sanctuary. You could say I was apartment whipped, architecturally locked. I was delusional. My apartment was meant for the head nun or the mother superior to oversee all the sisters in the convent, and seeing as I was going on more than a year of a dry spell with no prospects on the horizon, I felt that this was a role I could play with some ease. For the first few weeks, living there was harmonious. We, the tenants, were just a bunch of blue-collar workers trying to make ends meet, get a decent night's sleep before our laborious grind began again the next day. However, our delicate balance of co-living was soon to be thrown off its foundation as rents were systematically increased and renovation notices were strategically posted. I stood by as one by one my neighbors moved away, and those laborious grinds slowly began to occur nightly rather than daily. The first night I awoke at 3 a.m. to the sound of one of my neighbors fornicating. I was shocked. Shocked by the fact that I could hear them so clearly, as though they were in my bed, slowly pushing me off the edge with a sweaty foot and a jabbing knee. The following morning, I wrote my one new downstairs neighbor a polite and formal note on matching stationery, explaining the paper-thin walls and single-pane windows of this older building. I hoped she'd get the picture without me having to spell it out directly. The second night, the banging began at 4 a.m., and it was not the construction. I was almost positive that this noise was coming from a different direction and from a supposedly vacant unit. These were not the same offenders as the previous night. I called my landlord to file a formal complaint, and I wasn't taken seriously at all. A few quiet nights passed, and I was grateful for the reprieve. Then one evening, I pulled into my assigned parking place to find a woman sitting up against a closed side entry door. I had never seen her before, and clearly she did not have a key to the building. She stared straight ahead, her mascara thickly smudged underneath her eyes. She was a real woman of the night, if you will. That night seemed endless, due to all the fuckery. It was then that I came to the realization that the old nunnery had transformed into a cat house of sorts, a lair of prostitution, if you will, a fuck shack. I recalled my role as the lead nun and decided it was time for me to throw in the towel on that acting career. There was no way I was going to convert all those fuckers to celibacy. From then on, each night I would lie in bed, clasp my hands together, and quietly pray that they would all climax in unison, creating a nuclear sexplosion, which would instantaneously incinerate our building, taking me out along with it. Then I would neatly tuck myself in, knowing that the nightly sexcapades would commence around 2 a.m. As though I had set my alarm to the porn station, I would jolt awake at 2 a.m. to a sexual cacophony of guttural grunts, mid-level moans, and soprano screams. There was never any hope of falling back to sleep until everyone had finished. So in the meantime, I would play the game show host of a game I had never asked to be a part of with these people. Who would come first? The goal of the game was to guess correctly, of course. Would it be the bangers, with whom I shared a bedroom wall? I could never quite figure out what was causing the banging sound against our wall by my head, for surely they didn't own a headboard. Headboards, I imagined, were for people who actually owned furniture in the apartment in which they were screwing and who didn't break into vacant apartment units to perform their fuckery. I tried banging on the wall myself, but clearly these offenders were far beyond that sort of retaliation. Would it be the moaners? Really, it was the woman who made most of the noise on this team. Or would it be the yellers across the hall? I never did determine if they were actually yelling or if they just turned up their TV to drown out the other disturbing nightly noises. Valentine's Day turned into a 48-hour all-out fuckathon, with each constant vying for the championship. And I didn't even receive so much as a Valentine's card. Around this time, I began seeing a guy. But just that. Seeing him and talking to him, neither of us seemed to be sure if what we had would ever develop into something more than a fond friendship. After a few months of outings, I felt I could trust him, and I told him all about the Johns and the Toots, the lovers and the humpers, haunting my nights. Judging by the dark, heavy bags beneath my eyes, I was in dire need of some deep, solid sleep. He agreed to house me for the weekend, no expectations or strings attached, the perfect nobleman to my sisterhood. I arrived at his apartment around 9 p.m. with my little overnight bag and already donning my sweatsuit pajama set. He came out to greet me and led me up an old, dark, rickety staircase to his unit as his hounds howled in the background. This was ominous and quite creepy, but I was exhausted and prepared to die. We watched a bit of TV, a chilling episode of True Detective, I think it was. Then it was time for my long-awaited REM cycles. We made my bed on the couch with some throw blankets and a spare pillow, and we said goodnight. He then retired to his own chambers with his hounds in tow. I had just begun to softly drift into the welcoming release of slumber when I was jolted awake yet again by a loud bang and a rumble coming from the unit directly below us. My God. It's followed me here. I mumbled in a daze, and then the screaming began. It was a shrill shrieking, surely that of a woman's voice. I sat stark upright in my little nest of dusty quilts in the darkness. I waited for my host to enter, but instead in came his hounds, barking incessantly as they dive-bombed off the couch in succession. I had already gotten to my feet in my shock, and I went to see if the host was still alive. I peered into the darkness of his room. Hey, what the hell is going on? I hissed into the black. My host suddenly bolted upright in his bed like he'd been electrocuted. Hey, what the hell is going on? He yells out. Clearly, he was as bewildered by this occurrence as I was. Hey, I think you should call the cops, I said, as I watched his silhouette stumble about getting his shorts back on in the dark. The shrieking and the crying continued. Hey, I should probably call the cops, huh? He more or less muttered to himself as I watched him put a shoe on the wrong foot. We sat by side. I'm gonna start that sentence over. We sat side by side on the nest of a couch bed, staring at the clock as it struck 1 a.m. A hound stood on each of us as we waited for the cops to arrive. All the while, this woman wailed on. She hadn't taken a moment's break for almost 10 minutes. She would have fit right in at my apartment complex. Really, she could have given all my neighbors a run for the championship in noise production, and I wish she fucking would have. The cops finally arrived, then an ambulance and a fire truck. I let my host know that once they carted her out of there, I would be on my way as well. I would never discover what became of that woman, and I didn't even care. I'd had enough. As I drove home, I thought about pulling over for a nap in a nearby parking lot, but thought again when I remembered that Houston was still ranked as one of the top cities for sex trafficking in the U.S. I returned home just as the fucking had begun once more. I turned up my white noise machine, and I popped in my earplugs, followed by a couple melatonin gummies. I then reprised my role as Mother Superior, the game show host of Houston's best little whorehouse nunnery. Thank you.
There was so much like medieval language in that story that I wasn't expecting. I don't know why the first word that cued me off to like, this is a lot of medieval language was fuckery, because I don't know if that is real, if they said that. But hounds, nunnery, I know we say that now, but it feels, old. I just appreciate it so much for such a modern story. Like I said, I've submitted some stories to Grown Up Storytime before, and I feel like telling you just a brief bit about both those stories is a great way to transition from what we just heard to what we are about to hear. So the first one I submitted was a long time ago. It was anonymous. Actually, I made up a pen name called Lila Wentworth, which just sounds like a made-up name, I hope, to you if you're discerning. And just going to throw a little shade. And I remember, I don't know who I got paid by, because the story writers do get paid for grown-up story time. But I had to go and tell them, like, it's me. And my story was very sexual, and I was very uncomfortable. And I'm fine telling you this now because it's not like Googleable with my name next to it. But I walked up to the table to get paid, and I go, I'm Lila Wentworth. I had cum on my stomach. So you too can share your stories. Grown-up story time. Now to transition you. So, get it out. Okay. The next story I submitted did have my name attached to it, and it was a really sad story about addiction. And so Grown-up story time is one of those places that on a Tuesday night can take you from cum-tum all the way to sad, but heartwarming. And this next story is called It's Still a Mystery to Me, written by Emily Hynds, who you just saw give that wonderful reading, and read by Brenda Valdivia.